Hey guys, so this is the summary of day 3 for the book of Enoch reading. So it's chapters 12 to 16. So in chapter 12, Enoch says that he was hidden, and no one of the children of men knew where he was hidden and where he abode, and what had become of him. He says that he was basically taken up into the heavens and that he was being a scribe up in heaven. And he's saying up to the point of the end of the flood is it sounds like the time at which he's talking about. Up to this point, nobody knew where he was, and he was told to go talk to the watchers that had defiled women and tell them the judgment that was coming for them, which is the judgment we talked about yesterday. And so he did, and he went to Azazel, who was one of the two that were specifically bound up, and he told them that a severe sentence was coming, and that all these watchers had basically formed a petition and came to him in fear and said, "Hey, can you go to the Holy Great One?" Is what they refer to it as God, the Holy Great One, and basically with our petition and ask for less of a sentence and for less of a sentence for our children. So he takes his petition, reads it, and falls asleep. And he has a vision in his dream, and he goes to the watchers after he wakes up and tells them what occurred in his dream. In his dream, he says that he fell asleep while he was reading this petition, and he was basically taken up to heaven and shown a house that was made of crystal and it was covered in fire, and that inside of this house there was all these cherubim, which are like high level angels, and that he felt fear, and he fell on his face. And when he fell on his face in there, it almost sounds how it reads is that he was then shown another vision, like it was almost like a dream in a dream, or it could be that he fell on his face and then was shown a second house, which was even more tremendous and more crystal and more fire than he could even begin to describe. He specifically says he couldn't even describe it. And inside of this second house was the Lord. And the Lord was not being looked at by any of his angels or any of his protectors. He had 10,000 by 10,000 of the most holy protectors surrounding him, and uh, that Enoch was bowing in front of him. The Lord said, "Enoch, be not afraid, come here." And he basically talked to him. And he said, I know that you have a petition that you came to me with, and so what I say to you is to tell to them. And he says, "Who are you to have a human come petition for you? You're supposed to be petitioning for the humans." He's talking to the Lord is talking to the watchers, and he says, what have you done? You were a spiritual being. You were of spirit. You were not of flesh, and you looked upon these creations of flesh and blood and looked upon their daughters, and you decided to defile them and make children with them. And he says, and now your children are born of earth. And so those children, it sounds like part of their petition was almost like they wanted their children to be able to ascend and go into these kingdoms of heaven or these higher realms. And it sounds like the Lord is telling them why their children can't. He says, "Your children are of flesh, they were born of earth, and so that's where they're going to stay." He's like, "You were a spirit that was born in the spirit realm, and you had eternal life, and you made a decision to then take a wife with something of flesh." And so he's describing this difference of these creatures of flesh that are flesh and spirit, and now they're an evil spirit, and they will forever be known as an evil spirit. And so it was interesting that God gave, an explanation, because, I feel like God could have just been like, "No, I'm not going to hear any of it," and just no. But he said, he gave I felt like it was a pretty legit explanation. He said, "You're of spirit, you came from the spirit realm, and you were meant to stay in the spirit realm, And what you've done is a violation because you're of spirit and you laid with flesh and you created these spirit flesh mixtures. And he says that's, you know, essentially an abomination, and they're destroying the earth. They're not doing good down there, and that's why we have to do what we're going to do. And one of the things, the closing statement he says is, "Say to them, therefore, you have no peace." That was the closing statement. And so, you know, there was a few things to unpack in these last couple days. Something to draw is not just that they slept with women, it's also that they taught these like forbidden knowledges. You know, they're angels, they're of spirit. And so they went down and taught these humans, you know, witchcraft and warcraft and uh, things that were not, ended up not serving them well, you know. And so God is saying, not only is it that you slept with humans, but you've taught them forbidden arts as well, you know. So this is just giving more of an elaborate explanation as to what was going on prior to the flood of Noah and the judgment of the offspring of these watchers or these angels, which have been referred to in the Bible as the Nephilim. Um, and we will keep going tomorrow. It sounds like we're not quite done with God talking to Enoch in this vision. And so we'll pick up tomorrow. Thank you.